A cadaver in a classroom. As students of medicine, it's important at the outset that you realize that a cadaver in a classroom is not a dead human being.
Well, Carrie, yes and no. You know, yes, if you do that to the detriment of learning the structures you need to learn, you're hurting your medical education. No, someday you're going to be just like that cadaver. It's part of who you are now and who you will be, and you don't really fully develop as a compassionate physician and human being unless you can move along the road to that kind of self-knowledge of your own mortality and your relationship to the people who came before you. What I wanted to do was create a film that heightened and explored the relationship between the donors and the dissectors, between the living and the dead. I thought, what better way to do it than to interview students and ask them to speak as if they were speaking to donors, and then speak to donors and ask them to speak as if they were speaking to students, and then see what kind of dialogue we could get going across this divide that's so hard to bridge.
After I get up in the morning, I come down to clean supply, and the routine is pretty much standard. The light switch is on the outside, so I turn on the light switch, come in, turn on the air conditioner, turn on the radio, take off my shirt, check the work orders on the equipment and kind of line a schedule out, and then start working on equipment. Dad did all the repairs around the house. And if I tried something, if I did it wrong, he'd laugh at me. And I didn't take being laughed at very well, so I got to where I wouldn't try anything. And when I went into the service and went through these batteries of tests that are supposed to find your abilities, I ended up in helicopter mechanics school, which is about the highest you can go in the Army. Well, after I got out of the Army, I had a friend that was working in a flower shop. And I went by to have coffee with him, and he had a pretty little girl in there. So I kept coming back and having coffee. And one day I came back, and he and the girl were both gone. And I found out that the owner of the shop was going to will the shop to him when she died. And she gave him a choice. He could have the girl or the shop, but he couldn't have both. So he took the girl, and I don't blame him. But she asked me if I'd come by and help her for a while. And I did, and I had a knack for it. And in about 6 months' time, I was running the shop, doing the buying, most of the designing, and all the bookkeeping. And that went on for a couple of years, I guess. When I was about 12 or 13, I would go up to the anatomy lab when it was in the Keeler building and look at the specimen jars and those beautiful cabinets that they had. There were hundreds of specimens, malformed fetuses, body parts, Then we go into the anatomy lab itself where they were working on cadavers. Of course, they weren't working on them when we were there, but we'd lift up the sheets and check out the sexes of the males and the females. I didn't feel queasy. I didn't feel frightened. I felt intrigued in a way that all these pieces functioned as a unit.
As soon as we came into medical school, we knew we were going to take gross anatomy.
I had read a lot of stuff. Oh, we're gonna go through gross anatomy. We're gonna go see dead bodies, and that really shaken me up.
I'm not used to, I don't think any of us are used to like seeing dead people or people that have died or passed away. And just as soon as we walk in here, you know you're going to come and dissect a human cadaver or a body that was once living.
The first day I actually came into lab, and we had to kind of uncover the body. Had the sheet on top, and we had to kind of pull back the sheet.
We could be selective about which parts of the drapery that we would remove. So I insisted for our group that we not remove the part on the face, because I could already see just the way that it was covering the face, that the nose was smushed and it just was going to look eerie. So I insisted that we just drape it back from the neck down, because I was kind of afraid of becoming at least that familiar with the body.
Bob Harvey, and you're Ann. Nice to meet you.
We had to stop for a second and go ahead, take a deep breath, and take the first slice.
So when we took the first slice, I actually had sat down because I didn't know how I was going to react to it.
I was having to make my first cut in a cadaver, and I could still remember that time. It was a bit of a frightening experience.
Making that first cut, it feels like you're going to cause the person pain.
You don't want to feel that. You do not want to feel the depth of your horror or your fear or your guilt or anything else. You know, you just want to learn it.
As you get engrossed in trying to learn this anatomy, you have a tendency to sort of move away from the humanity of it and to the task of things, which is, there's something I need to learn here.
The more I think about that this was a living person, I don't know, it kind of scares me. So I kind of try to shut it out.
Someone else's table, the lady's fingers are still painted. And when we were taking our practical and I came across that table and I just saw this flash of red and I looked back and I saw her hand and it threw me back. I was like, whoa, and I thought it was somebody real, you know, lying there. And then I had to think, okay, wait, you're taking a test, remember, focus.
How many of any of us could handle that amount of complexity in our lives and be able to move between those states of relating to a person as a human being or relating to a body as the remnant of a human being and being sensitive to that, and then do everything that a medical student has to do, which is learn every single nerve, where every single vein goes, and every single artery, and every single bone, and then learn the microanatomy. You can't do that thinking about people. You can only do that thinking about structures.
When we first all dissected the chest and we opened up the rib cage and we took out her lungs, we saw that she had cancer that had spread out.
When I first saw that, I thought, what was she going through the last couple of hours? Was she, laying down? Was she feeling any pain? That's when I really started thinking about, how she was when she was alive.
And I imagine her just expiring, just.
And when we took out the lungs, you just felt these nodules all over the lung. And it just makes you think that you could die of cancer just one day, or you could be walking across the street and a car can hit you, or and it just gets to you because you don't know when your time's gonna come.
Times I thought I might be shot by Jella's husband. I've been washed overboard in the North Sea. I've been shot at in Germany by an MP. the few altercations I've had. And yes, death was not imminent, but it was certainly a possibility, and I thought about it.
Something has kept me from thinking about that, I guess. In fact, I would say I probably thought about death more before I actually started coming in here.
I had thoughts I'm going to be as dead as she is, but it wasn't so much one day I'm going to die, and this is just a reminder of it. It was more of I'm this close to being dead right now. The only difference was that the heart wasn't actually moving on its own accord. The electricity was gone.
I work in a building where dissections go on 10 feet above my head, day in and day out, and where bodies are prepared 2 floors down and shift up from the morgue to the lab via an elevator that comes in between the wall, that comes right up in. I mean, it's all around me.
I would be quite unable to give the lecture you came to hear, and I'm not sure you should hear the lecture I'd like to give.
Well, it happened several years ago. I was coming into my office on a Monday morning. The day started out with a tremendous argument with my wife. Wasn't feeling very happy when I walked in. There was a phone mail message from my secretary informing me that she wasn't going to be in that day, and it was going to be kind of a hectic day for me. So all in all, I was not in a very good mood and feeling pretty sorry for myself. About that time, I heard somebody open the door, and we have sort of a long hallway coming into my office, and turned around and saw a young fellow bouncing in with a big smile on his face, and I looked at him and sort of said gruffly, "Can I help you?" And he said, "Yes, I'm here to donate my body." And I kind of smiled and said, "You're kind of young to do that." And he looked at me with a head cocked and said, "Well," he says, "I've got to have some fairly serious neurosurgery on my brain at the end of this week. And the doctors tell me I don't have a very good chance of making it. And I'm just here to take care of business and do what I think's the right thing to do."
Anatomy is more or less the study of the human body. The human body is not necessarily the human being.
I said, "Are you sure you're having this surgery on Friday?" And he said, "Yes." And I said, "You're handling it very well." And he says, "Well," he says, "I've had a good life. It's been shorter than I wanted, but I had a good relationships with friends and family. I was able to help an awful lot of other people that have the same problem as I have in getting them through this very difficult time. So I feel very rich, and I wanted to do something as sort of a last act." He started walking out, and I watched him bounce out as he bounced back in, and he turned around kind of quickly and said, "There is a favor I would like to ask of you." And I said, "Sure." He said, "Will you be there? Will you be there when my body is on this table and the medical students are there?" And I said, "I probably will be." And he said, "Well, would you mind telling them that I was a nice guy and that I hope they learn a hell of a lot of anatomy from me?"
Here lies a cadaver. The fact that she was, not long ago, a living, warm, lovely young girl is of little consequence in this classroom.
And later that year, when we started the new medical school class, I made it a point to be there. The students took the covers off the cadaver. The first thing they noticed is how young he was. And one of the students said, "I wonder what he was like."
He would not be required to dissect and examine the love that was in her, or the hate.
I told him he was a nice guy, and you better learn a lot of anatomy from him. Quite an experience.
If I were a student working on one of these cadavers, I would probably want to touch, move, handle, or manipulate anything I could see or anything I'd be working with.
When you see, say, for example, the history of surgery, you can get the book of Barnes & Noble. You see these, I guess, idealized drawings of